Required a line here.
Can Liz renew with you right now?
Oh, yeah. Good Russia. Thank you. Democratic 21st century. I'm really glad you all can make it today. I'm really excited about our program today, and I think you'll really enjoy it. Want to just remind everybody that the club, we are on a calendar year membership. So this would be the time to renew the membership for 2023. Easiest way to do that is probably to go online at damcenturyclub.org. damcenturyclub.org. And we really appreciate our committee for being here. Our such a club who's able to support the Democratic stakeholders down on Moorpark. So if you've ever had occasion to go there, a lot of the work they do. The reason it's there is because of us. So our dues and other investments that we've been able to make are what fund that program down there. We wanted to have our board members raise their hands or stand to be acknowledged. Raise your hand, board members. Please give my hand. These are the volunteers that keep our club running. Also want to remind our board members that our next board member, excuse me, is next Wednesday at noon, and we meet by a miracle of noon. So it's really easy to attend. I wanted to also welcome the electeds that we have here today. Let's start at John's table in the back there. Any elected official? Please. Oh.
And prize.
Who are you?
David Cohen, San City.
Moving over here to Fred's table, do we have any elected officials visiting us today from that table? All right. Well, Rob, you're trying. So that's good.
I wasn't sure.
Let me go over here to Courtney's table, elected officials. Can you get visiting with us today? Don't be shy. Okay. And let's try this again right here in the front. Elected officials, please.
There's Pat Walter back there.
Pat, how are you doing?
It's like, and I'd like to give you all an official welcome now to you for Gary's class or Peter and
There she is.
How are you? And but we can't go without introducing Jim Bell, our former senator. So Jim, please. Oh, and you're on water. All right, I'm standing right here. No, right. Right, don't be shy.
Calvin here, open space authority.
The more that we have together. Unfortunately, our county chair.
I'm not currently elected, but I do know somebody whose birthday is like imminent. We can say happy birthday to Jackie when you have a minute.
We will, and we're gonna make it a, we're gonna kill two birds with one stone, because also in our audience today, we are pleased to have David Bloom, world-renowned expert in regenerative agriculture and biofuels. And today also happens to be David's birthday. Forgive me, the other lady's name was? The other lady's name? Jackie. Jackie. Oh, Jackie.
Jackie Wheeler.
Okay, so when we get to the name part, it'll be Jackie and Dave. Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3, go.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, Jackie and Dave. Happy birthday to you.
You're welcome. So how does it feel to finally be 50? Oh. All right, well, I now have the distinct pleasure to introduce our speaker today. I'm really tickled to introduce Peter Fiekowsky. And, I'll give you more of the details of his background. And unfortunately, we were not able to get the slides to work. So please be supportive of Peter Son's slides. The climate crisis is something we're all really aware of. We're in this room, we are. Unfortunately, not enough folks out there are, although I am noticing they're using the word crisis more often now than I hear them mention it on the news. And reducing our emissions seems to be where all the focus has been for the last 10 or 20 years. That's great, and it's absolutely critical, but as Peter's going to explain to us, it's not enough. And Peter knows wherever he speaks. Peter is a MIT graduate and professor emeritus, serial entrepreneur, astrophysicist, philanthropist, author of a groundbreaking book called Climate Restoration, which we have copies of up here for sale afterwards if you're interested. He's also worked with NASA and the Fairchild Schlumberger Artificial Intelligence Lab in Palo Alto. He holds 27 patents. He's on the board of Solar Apex, a fintech company dedicated to tripling the rate of investment in solar projects. He's also founded several environmental groups focused on direct action to address the climate crisis, including the Foundation for Climate Restoration, and Method Oxidation Corporation, and the Stable Planet Alliance. Please give a warm welcome to Peter Fiekowsky.
Thank you for being here on a Friday afternoon. It's good to have a conversation with a bunch of activists. I don't have to inspire you to go do something. But what I want to talk about is what is it we want to accomplish? Because we've got the energy, and that's the whole topic of climate restoration. And the premise of the whole thing is very, very simple. That we all want to restore, we want to give our children a climate that humans have actually survived long term. A climate that we know that they'll survive in. Everyone wants that. And the second premise is that we have the technologies to do it. We have the funding and the technologies, but we're not doing it. And so what's missing is we need the will. And so just to explain that a little bit, we've all heard of the UN climate goals, right? Net zero by 2050. Now, how many of you have heard an expert say that, oh, if we achieve that goal, we have a decent chance of survival? Okay, who do you know who said that? No one. Right. Someone in the front does that all the time. Right. So no expert has ever said that on record. At least no, I say that boldly so that someone will come to me and show me that Michael Mann said, no, Michael Mann does not say that. Jim Hansen doesn't say that. No. The UN goal, the net zero by 2050, was established essentially by the Nobel economist who said that if we go above 2 degrees warming, it'll be bad for the economy. They never asked the question, what's it going to take for our grandchildren to survive? Right? Have you ever heard the UN ask that question? Well, that's the topic of climate restoration, is that we all want climate that humans have maintained for the last 10,000 years, that climate that allowed us to develop agriculture and civilization. And who knows what the CO2 level is that we had for that 10,000 years? 280, exactly. And who knows what's the highest CO2 level that humans have ever survived on?
300.
300. And that was about 200,000 years ago. The warmed a little bit and got to 300 parts per million CO2. And then who knows what today's CO2 level is? But, okay, it's 420, but 460 is what the UN is targeting us for in 2050. So the highest humans have ever survived is 300. We're at 420, and the UN is targeting us for 460. Not a good deal for our grandkids. And most of us are gray hairs, we'll be okay. And most of the UN is gray hairs, and they'll be okay. But this is about our grandchildren. And one of the things that's happening now is we're actually bringing the indigenous communities in, who, if you remember, one of the reasons of indigenous communities is a concern for 7 generations, that any decision we make must be beneficial for our descendants 7 generations out. And we're actually, this climate restoration movement is bringing us together with our Western quarterly and annual income values, plus the indigenous 7 generation values. Okay, so we want to restore the climate, and I'm claiming we can. And someone's going to ask, how can we do that? Who's going to ask me?
How can we do that, Peter?
And anyone here would answer, well, we would do it by imitating nature, wouldn't we? I mean, the things that work large scale are the things that nature does. Well, I think everyone here knows that the planet goes through ice ages every 100,000 years or so. We've had 10 ice ages since in the last 1,000,000 years. And in the ice ages, the atmospheric CO2 goes down by the same amount that we need to go down to get back to pre-industrial. So I'm telling you, yes, nature has done exactly what we need to do 10 times in the last 1,000,000 years, and we know how nature did it. And for us to duplicate that, turns out, and we can talk about it a little more later. I'm not gonna get too technical, that's long. But to do it is about $1 billion in investment. Or if you don't want to get income out of it, you can do $500 million a year. Almost nothing compared to the federal budget, the federal deficit. The income on this block is not new. So that's the first point is to realize that it's been right in front of our nose, and the methods for doing it were written up in 1990, and they were very controversial in 1990 because the scientist who wrote about it, he was at Moss Landing here. Anyone live near Moss Landing? John? So that's where this whole thing started. What was discovering that it's called the iron hypothesis. That one of the key things that leads to ice ages, that leads to removing 1 trillion tons of CO2 over a number of thousands of years, is iron. That when I think of the ocean, I think of the blue ocean, it's blue, but it's not green. You know, and we all know that the way we get CO2 out of the air primarily is with photosynthesis. And I would all think about redwood trees, right, and oak trees. But, well, redwood trees last a long time, but oak trees typically will last, 80 or 100 years, at which point they die and the carbon goes back into the air. In the ocean, when you have plants grow, they sink. Either they or the animals that eat them sink, and thinking the deep ocean, there's very little oxygen and they don't rot. And that's how the planet does ice ages. We actually know how to do the same thing, because what turns blue ocean green is iron. That is, in most of the blue ocean, the reason it's not green it's got all the nutrients, obviously a lot of water, obviously a lot of sun, is there's not enough iron. And the amount of iron is unbelievably low. It's about a millionth of a part per million. So it's a few parts per trillion that's needed. And the reason it took until 1990 for this to be written about is that science couldn't measure anything that small until the 1980s. Distributing minute amounts of iron in the right places at the right time is how nature does it, and that's how we will do it. We can. It was tested 10 years ago, and looked like it removed about 100 million tons of CO2 at a cost for the whole test of about $2.5 million. So to divide that in your head, about 3 cents per ton of CO2 to use the FAT method. Now, there are other possible methods. How many of you have heard of direct air capture? Right? Direct air capture got, I think, $3.5 or $6 billion in the federal budget in 2021. So there are a lot of other methods. It's just that they're several thousand times more expensive, and most of us want to save that much money. So we can see that we have methods to do it. In summary, what nature uses to get massive amounts of carbon out of the atmosphere, one is ocean photosynthesis, and so that's with the algae, and also with macroalgae, as John works with kelp. That both of them work. And the other thing that nature does at this large scale is limestone. And it turns out 99% of the carbon on the planet is on the bottom of the ocean in the form of limestone. And if you ever see the White Cliffs of Dover, several hundred foot high cliffs of pure limestone, that's just 100 million or 500 million years where the seafloor, where the skeletons and shells have accumulated. Well, we can do the same thing. There's a company here in Silicon Valley called Blue Planet Systems, which imitates how oysters make an oyster shell, right? If you think of the last time you had oysters at dinner or for cocktails, that shell was not, it didn't take rocket science to make that shell. That shell is limestone. And so they do the same chemistry, and then they can sell the limestone for use in our concrete, for our roads and our buildings, which we have a lot of. It costs, it takes more capital to do it than the ocean fertilization, but it's definitely doable. And so the fact here is that we've got, we all care about our children. I'm not going to ask you how many of you care about your children. And that they survive. But because we're really graduating to the point where humanity is worrying about it. If you think about it, for the whole history of humanity, for 3 million years or whatever that is, we've never had to worry about will the planet sustain our children. So we don't have any history about how do we restore a planet so that our children can survive. Now, the climate discussion became very political, right? Because the natural thing when you have something controversial is if you're a Democrat, you blame the Republicans. If you're a Republican, you blame the Democrats. If you're Christian, you blame the Hindus, and if you're Hindu, you blame the Muslims, or whatever it is. That's just human nature. I don't think will ever change, except that here we are of dozens of nationalities and faiths and traditions and so on. It's easy for us to get along. Humanity has reached a new point where we all have to acknowledge we're all in it together. We like the diversity of different cultures and beliefs and arts and so on, and at the same time we all belong to humanity for the first time. And the opportunity here, in the Democratic Club is to start bringing that thinking into Washington. Because it's fine for the Democrats and Republicans to fight as long as you don't take it so seriously. And there wouldn't be any baseball game, with the Giants, if they weren't the Dodgers, right? And our kids would be getting drunk on whatever those days are that the games are. Maybe we get drunk, not my personal thing. But, so we want to celebrate it. We also want to work together because everyone wants to restore the climate. We can do it. The cost is low. We can talk technical later if you want, but it doesn't look like a technical audience. And so I think I'll stop there. The invitation is to generate the leadership. Is what's Cortez's first name?
Dave Cortez, Senator Cortez.
Yes, Dave Cortez. Was the first in the whole country, in the whole world, in the history of mankind, to introduce a climate restoration declaration when he was head of Santa Clara. And he's now in the California Senate. There are a couple other senators, Becker and who's the other one? We can't remember.
Alex Lee.
Could be. Who are now talking about climate restoration, but picking up momentum in Sacramento. There's murmurs in DC, but and I talked with Edu, I talked with Rokana, talked with Lofton, but there's only one of me, and we need more than one of me talking to them because everybody wants it, but they can't act until they get the momentum. So a little example is I was fortunate, a friend of mine was engaged in a project with the Vatican after the Laudato Si encyclical. And so the Vatican was promoting businesses that were taking care of our common home. And I'm Jewish, so I don't have a religious allegiance to the Pope, but I knew that he's a central figure on our planet. And so I got involved, and eventually they asked us to put on a conference, a climate restoration conference in Rome, which we did. And about a year later, Pope Francis made an announcement, or one of his announcements, was that climate restoration is of utmost importance. Now, this was 3.5 years ago, and it did not go viral yet. And so we learned a lot about what's needed is getting some grassroots support, getting more momentum, and that's one reason why we have the book, and you can buy copies here. Julie, will you stand up? Julia Dieter has been my partner in this almost from the beginning. I've known her for decades. And so you can ask her questions as well as me at the end. And what we're doing now, and this is something that we can ask our representatives to support, is we're setting up to have President Biden declare a U.S. commitment to restoring the climate for our children. It's almost like crazy simple, but he can only do it if Lofgren, right? She's still head of the Democratic caucus, right? Right. So we have to have Lofgren talk about it. It'll be easy, right? 4 of you can talk to her, and it will be done. And Rokana, I forgot which committee he's head of now, but it's a critical committee. I apologize, I forget everything today. But we have what we takes right here in the room to get this thing going. And it's just making it something that you can talk about because it's so embarrassingly simple. No one wants to say it. It took 2 years to get Pope Francis, who just wrote the whole encyclical about taking care of our planet. Not because we had to convince them of anything, just because it's so embarrassingly obvious. So I'm going to end there and take questions. Please, purchase the book. You can go to our website. You can go to the Foundation for Climate Restoration and sign up. It'd be great to become a monthly donor. What I love about becoming a monthly donor is no matter what it is, whether it's $2 or $2,000 a month, when you see that on your credit card, it reminds you that you're committed to restoring the climate, and that will bring thoughts up and make things happen. We think that commitment says, "Oh, I'm committed." That's the first part. The main part of commitment is having a structure, a regular reminder, and the foundation can use funding for their education and advocacy programs.
Before we open it up for Q&A, could you tell us a little bit about the OIF Alliance?
Yes.
I could say something real fast, except you'll lose your audience for a minute. There's cheesecake and chocolate mousse.
Cheesecake and chocolate, I'm gonna lose on that. Thank you. Now everyone's best friend. I want to get excited for that. A number of us, have put together have put together the OIF alliance. What is that? Ocean iron fertilization is that technique of using the iron in the ocean at the right place in the right time, imitating exactly how nature does it before ice ages. So although safety has to be tested, it's been done so many thousands of times. The risk of it, no one's worried about the risk of it. The Ocean Iron Fertilization Alliance, the OIF Alliance, is working to get as many organizations as possible, including the hopefully Democratic and hopefully the Republican Party. I'm sure the Republicans are actually a little more enthusiastic than the Democrats about this, because you can do it without any government support. Government support is good, but of course Republicans like the fact that you can do it without the government. But there's huge opportunity there. It gives us an opportunity to bridge across the aisle and work on something that's really close to our hearts, and we have exactly the same desires for it. So, yes, so you can talk to us about how you might get involved. I didn't bring anything to that. So, yeah, you can talk about that. Go ahead.
Yeah, could you go over what the iron fertilization is?
Yes.
Because as an applicant, I don't think I could yet go talk to my representative and say, this is what you need to do. So I think we need a little more technical stuff here. So could you talk for a little bit?
I'm thinking, here's the thing, is if you, I might say no to your question. And the reason is the conflict is kind of speculation. And the point is that we can do it. It's very simple, but if you dive into the solution, what happens is the discussion goes right into the weeds, and people avoid the treacherous questions of, am I really committed that my grandchildren survive? And so I'm going to say no to and not answer your question. We can go to read the book, we can talk one-on-one.
Well, I will not advocate ever for something I can't explain.
Right. Well, you don't advocate for the ocean iron fertilization. Advocate for President Biden declaring a commitment to restoring the climate.
Okay.
Yeah, do that, because he's advocating like overtly for the UN goals, and we call them the Paris suicide, right? Because no one thinks we can survive even if we achieve those goals. So we want him to frame what he's doing, because it's brilliant. You know, as far as I can tell, he read my book and put the things in the book in his replacement reduction. He's doing brilliant stuff, but we need to support him just like we failed to support Pope Francis to frame frame it that way. And I'll give you just a little bit, and that is the ocean iron fertilization. That's minute amounts of iron dust. It's like your hair doesn't like pink, right? And what makes it pink is iron. And so this minute amounts of iron dust at the right places in the ocean at the right times, so that you get the photosynthesis and the phytoplankton, which pulls a lot of CO2, huge amounts of CO2 out of the air, just the way forests do. Except when forests die, they rot. When the phytoplankton die, they sink. Is that good?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, John. I think I. Oh, okay. Yes.
So what were the natural causes of this variation or an influx of iron, other than maybe some asteroid, comet, or a giant volcano spewing up? And volcanoes, as we know, create a lot of pollution that actually block. It doesn't block heat, it actually blocks sunlight, which causes cooling very rapidly too. So I mean, we could have a giant, explosion and cool quickly, but no one really likes that.
Right.
So what are the iron sources that you say? Because it had to happen, the surge that caused
Yeah.
global cooling, what
Great
happens?
question. The question is, where did, in nature, where does the iron come from? It's from dust storms. So most of us heard the news a few years ago about this big dust storm from the Sahara that blew across the Atlantic. And then there used to be more dust storms, and the technical description is complicated, but there are fewer dust storms now. But more importantly, in the last 200 years, we've killed off the whales. We've killed off 95% of the whale population. I talked about how when the phytoplankton die, they sink. Well, whales will dive into the ocean and eat, and then would come to the surface and poop, and their poop has a lot of iron in it. And that was one of the main things that kept the CO2 in balance. Now we've killed off the whales, we have to do other things. Now, the good news is, when they did a test 10 years ago with iron fertilization, the fish population exploded in that area of the Gulf of Alaska. And the pink salmon catch quadrupled the following year. The orca whale population, they had something like 5 babies 2 years later. The gestation period is just about 2 years. They hadn't had any orca babies in about 7 years. But there was food, right? There were millions and millions of tons of food and fish, and the orca revived. Now, for political reasons, that was not repeated. That was 10 years ago. And the Ocean Iron, the OIF Alliance is working to get the first new OIF test done just this year, hopefully in the second half of this year. Okay, yes.
So hi, I'm Heather Durham. I represent TAG, Silicon Valley Tech, Art, Green Sustainability. And we did our 200 show with the United Nations, both sort of work there, the United Nations of California, someone that works at Cambridge is working on eradicating pollution and poverty, which goes back to climate. So I commend for what you're doing. This is wonderful. I'd love you to come on the show. There was a bunch of information in the news recently about the ozone now being fixed. And can you talk a little bit about how that relates to climate? And there's been a little bit about that. Is there any connection here to restoration and what you're doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. The question was, first of all, I'd love to talk with you, so come and get my talk afterwards. Then the question was, how does the healing of the ozone hole compare with climate restoration? And the good news is the healing of the ozone hole shows that we can do these massive things. Now, the fact that we make things worse does we can do these massive things too. Now, a trap I find with the ozone hole is that all we have to do with the ozone hole is stop polluting, right? And that's what we're trying to do. We say stop emissions, which is always a good thing, for health reasons, environmental reasons, economic reasons, environmental reasons. However, if all we, as I said, if all we do is stop polluting in terms of greenhouse gas, CO2 will be 460 parts per million, a level that no one says that we can survive. We might. I like to say that Bill Gates' kids will probably be okay. They'll find a place. But for the rest of us, no one says that's a good idea. So, so climate restoration is it's sort of a much harder thing to do because we have to intentionally reduce. And so one of our goals also this year is to get the UN to modify their climate goal. The climate goal now is to stabilize greenhouse gas emissions. Unfortunately, at levels that humans can't survive. They forgot to say restore and stabilize greenhouse gas emissions. So we're also working with people at the UN to get that restored and added to the UN goals.
And there's a huge, if people are really interested in learning about, there's a huge thing on their website about climate. And of course, if you want to advocate, you have to educate yourself, right? Or research.
Yeah. Which website are you referring to?
The United Nations has a full climate section.
Yes.
Right.
But now be wary because, the UN, their official goal is stabilize, not restore and stabilize. And so, you might look at my website, peterfiekowsky.com. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, John.
So during the last two COP meetings, which is the discussion over the Paris Accord, in both occasions, right at the 11th hour, and 1 minute before midnight, so to speak, before the thing is over, the Chinese and India asked for one word to be changed in the agreement that everybody had resolved to do. And that agreement was to phase out coal. And both years, they changed it to phase down coal. Because otherwise they couldn't get a signature. So let's remember that not everybody is in favor of working to reduce the CO2 in the atmosphere. That's fine. But I think the idea of increasing photosynthesis by using phytoplankton is so simple. My only question is, and it's a question that's only a matter of how business works, is the main energy needed to make the powdered coal, the size reduction of the pile, the milling of the coal into fine enough dust? I'm sorry, I'm not coal. I focus my iron.
Right. So the question is, what is the energy cost of doing the ocean iron fertilization? And the answer is practically zero. Yeah, because the iron ore dust is in huge piles at any steel factory, any steel mill. And so they pay you to take it away. And it's a very small amount. It's about per year, it would be about $50 million worth of iron. Right, this is nothing for the whole planet.
So one follow-up would be, all of us would like to sail. You can sail out to the Golden Gate, and drop the powder in the water.
I think you should. I mean, I know that it won't make a measurable difference, but it'll make your heart happy. But there's science to be done to figure out, or technology, the optimization to figure out what's the best time, the best amount, the best density, and so on. Yeah.
You mentioned some of the other carbon sequestration, or the iron emission. I think what you're saying is the iron is the most cost-effective, best way. What do you think? Are there some of the other technologies that come along in the portables, or do you need other technologies
So the question is, are there going to be other carbon removal technologies that would be useful? And the answer is yes. That there's a whole huge field of carbon tech, which is in the news constantly. And the carbon tech allows industries that need CO2. Obviously, soda, fizzy drinks is one, but plastics and steel just a wide number of industries need CO2. And so instead of getting CO2 from burning natural gas, they can get CO2 from the atmosphere. So carbon tech is going to make a big difference, often to the indefinite future. When it comes to the scale that we need, so those are going to produce a few million tons of CO2, maybe a billion tons. We need a trillion tons. This is 3 orders of magnitude larger, whole different bottle of wax. In the book, what you'll find is there are 3 criteria that I'll give you. There are 3 criteria for climate restoration removal. One is that it be scalable up to 60 gigatons a year. The second is that it is permanent, that the CO2 stays sequestered for at least 100 years. And the third is that it be financially viable. That is to say, there has to be some funding for it. Now, the things like direct air capture, which are $500 to $1,000 per ton, if you were to scale that up to climate scale, that would be about $100 trillion. Right, that's the whole global GDP. That is not a viable business model. On the other hand, it's good for, Chevron uses the direct air capture to pump CO2 down to reduce the cost of their extracting petroleum. I don't know if anyone here is in favor of petroleum, but if you are, that's a really good use of carbon tax. I stay out of the political left to right side. And so then to answer your question, what other methods? So, we spent years asking this and had a lot of answers that looked like the direct air capture, because it's great. And then discovered that the only financially viable use of direct air capture is extracting petroleum. Sorry about that. And yet we got $6 billion in the budget 2 years ago to do that. Anyway, so there's the iron fertilization. There's synthetic limestone, which Blue Planet is working on. There is the seaweed, so which is a variation on the ocean fertilization. Then there's a whole different topic, which I don't want to spend much time on, and that's methane oxidation. Now, I don't want to take too much time, but we hear about methane in the news a lot, and it's about a third of global warming is coming from methane in the atmosphere. And the talk is all about reducing emissions, of course, but almost half the emissions are from natural sources, and the ones that are from human-made sources are primarily livestock, rice, things that are really hard to change because the farmers don't want to change. Some do, but you're getting 1 billion farmers to change is a big deal. Methane oxidation is just takes the natural process. Nature oxidizes methane in the atmosphere with a half-life of about 8 years. Means any ton of methane in the air, 8 years later, half of it will have been oxidized to CO2 and water. And what we're working on is doubling that oxidation rate so that it takes only 4 years for the methane to oxidize. That means that the amount of methane in the air goes down by a factor of 2. That takes us the global warming back to what it was in 2002. So it's very cool. It's the same thing that nature does, but done carefully, just like in the iron fertilization, where there are volcanoes, and Mount Pinatubo is a great example. It shows if you look at the data, they removed 25 gigatons of CO2. But we can do much better than that by doing it at the right place in the right time. The same thing with methane, that doing it at the right place, right time, right chemicals, we can reduce the methane. But here's the kicker. How many of you have heard of the methane burst? And how many of you have heard of it and wish you hadn't? My time has gone up a couple of years ago on that. The methane burst is something that happened 52 million years ago. Last time our planet lost the Arctic ice cap, this melted because the planet was warming up, just like it's warming up now. We're warming up about 30 times faster than 50 million years ago. And at a certain point, the permafrost melted in such a way that a huge burst of methane was released from under the ice, under the permafrost ice. And that very sudden warming caused the extinction of a third of the species on our planet. And we don't want the same thing to happen. We've so far lost 85% of the ice in the Arctic Sea. And so the expectation is by 2040, in another 15, 16 years, it'll be gone. And the methane burst is happening. If you look at the methane maps, you can see red spots in the Arctic Ocean now that weren't there 4 years ago, even 2 years ago. So the methane burst is happening. We're all, as a physicist, I can tell you, probably won't be as bad as 50 million years ago. As a smart guy, I know that most of the things I know are wrong. And so it's really good to look at history and say, well, it did happen the last time we lost our Arctic ice cap. The good news is with this enhanced atmospheric methane activation, we can actually protect against it. So if the methane first becomes as bad as it was 50 million years ago, we can oxidize that methane before we lose any harvest, before we lose any more species. So those are the four. Okay, wait a minute, I promised you back there.
Yes, the iron fertilization of the oceans sounds like a really good idea. I was just wondering, how do you do it? It's interesting to hear that iron dust or powder is a byproduct, and we can use that for essential money. But how do you distribute millions of square miles of the ocean?
Great question. You don't do it over millions of square miles, is the first answer. That you want to do it the same way nature does. Now, eventually, maybe you would do it over millions of square miles, but you do it in eddies, in these what they call mesoscale eddies, 100-mile diameter eddies, which keeps it contained, so it's localized. And you do it by ship. You take the powdered iron, essentially the rouge that you use on your face. What makes it red is iron. And it's very, very fine. So you can imagine mixing that with seawater and diluting it out behind the ship. Easy enough, huh? I like an easy question. Thank you. Yeah.
The CO2 issue is actually becoming a very increasing here in the ocean because the oceans are warming. And warmer water with less gas. And what's happening at the bottom of the ocean is the methane slush, methane claptrage, which is because of the pressure, the methane becomes almost like ice. And it's buried under sediment that pours off the continent.
John, be quick, because we're getting late.
The Japanese are going out there sticking pipes through that sediment, thinking they'd harvest the methane and use it for natural gas on land. Luckily, internationally, it has stopped. But if the density of the ocean reduces from being heated, you could have methane bursts of this ice methane coming up to the surface and essentially wiping out the planet.
Yeah.
It's real care about that. So getting CO2 out of the ocean now, and cooling it, again, what you're talking about would be super important.
Right. And the good news is all of these projects are beginning to get underway. Now they're beginning to get underway at the level of we need $100,000 for several of them and $1 million for others. So it's just the beginning point, so we can really launch them this year. And I'm really honored to be able to talk to you guys about it. Okay.
Related to this gentleman's question back here, spreading this iron dust, it gets some haze. How much of the ocean do we have to do this to actually make a significant difference?
So the question is, how much of the ocean? About 1%. That's all.
Sorry,
About 1% of the ocean is all that's needed to be processed. Now, all of us have done projects. It'll probably end up being 2%, right? But I'm just telling you that the theory and the observations today say it's going to be only 1%. Yeah.
Well, in the best case scenario, we have the real political vote and we can start today. How fast do you think we can go to net zero, and then how fast can we go to the total decline of the carbon dioxide?
Oh, I love that question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Yes. The question is, how quickly can we get to net zero, and how quickly can we get to restore the climate? So the bottom line is we can definitely restore the climate by 2050. If we think our kids are that important, we could do it by 2040. But 2050 is a rounder number, and that's the number that we use. It's all about the CO2 removal, right? So we're going to be removing CO2 at a much higher rate than emissions. And so the emissions, they're going to keep on going down as we go to electric vehicles and solar power and winds and all those heat pumps. And so all that is on its way. Thank God California is leading. And again, all of you who've worked on that, thank you for your hard work. California leadership is just amazing on the global stage. That said, we now need to leave on the CO2 removal, on getting the CO2 out. The iron fertilization, we think that the way we've mapped it out at a fast growth rate, we would be at net zero by 2027.
Wow,
Yeah,
wow. We have time for one more.
okay.
So I've read your book and you detail that experiment in Alaska, in the Eddy. And what you describe in the book is this huge balloon of the fish population. It would seem the fishery, given the depletion of fish worldwide, would be all over this. Why not? What's happening there? I mean, nothing's happened for what, 5 or 10 years since that experiment, and yet we're having depletion of the whole fishery there is, becoming barren. There's a disconnect here.
So there's a disconnect. The fishing industry is somewhat interested, and they don't want to get caught up in the climate wars. And so what killed ocean fertilization in 2012 was the environmentalists saying, listen, if you remove CO2, then how do we convince people to stop emitting CO2? Right, which is it's like unfortunate, but that it was part of the culture wars that started in the 1980s. The fisheries say, we want nothing to do with it. If you run a business, you know that it's all about competition. And so if you restore the fish, the ocean is wide open. So it's not like a chicken of the sea is going to get all the tuna. If they increase the number of tuna, they have no competitive advantage still. But so that's why they're interested, but only minorly. But that could change, because again, if we make it so that they can feel proud of restoring the climate, that's good for their brand. Okay, so,
All right.
I have books here, and I can answer all those questions.
Yeah, and if we twist his arm, he might be willing to autograph your book. When you go out. I highly recommend it. It's short, it reads really fast, and it's given me a lot of hope, frankly, because the way things have been going with the lack of knowledge and commitment, all the disinformation around the climate crisis. Until I read Peter's book, they didn't have much hope for us. They do now. So let's see. Oh, also, if you're interested, the Ocean Iron Fertilization Alliance, OIF Alliance, our group is putting together a lobbying fund to work with legislators in Sacramento and the federal government. So if you're interested in just being a part of the group or contributing to the group, just get a hold of me. My email address is Craig5500 at Gmail. Craig5500 at Gmail. Shoot me a line, happy to hook you up. We have a Zoom meeting every Thursday to see how our progress is moving along. And right now, as I mentioned, we're putting together this fund to, so we welcome contributions.